Well, thanks, Heidi. I was once the future, because this is exactly 25 years since I first came to a UCISA event. And I'd like to say that I'd been at actually all the conferences since, but I believe that I have missed 3 or 4, unfortunately. It's delightful to be back with you and to chat with so many friends, but also so many new people who have come into the sector, bringing new blood, new ideas and new enthusiasm. And I'm very sorry, actually, I missed Paul's talk this morning, which I understand was challenging. My topic is as on the screen. Where I really want to start is the future evolution or revolution, and I guess that bears directly on what Paul said, asking whether universities really got digital and whether there was a revolution to come. I'm not going to speculate on that. I'm going to talk about the current pressures, mostly, to be fair, in England. 1 or 2 will apply across the 4 nations, but it was made very aware to me attending the Scottish Funding Council last week how different things are now, and also I've been in Ireland about a month ago, how different things are across the 4 nations. So apologies where I'm doing the England only bit. Evolution or revolution? It's their words. How do you detect when it is one or the other? I've been around in higher education since 1991, and indeed from my days involved with UCISA, pretty much at the heart of national stuff for over half that period. To me, higher education has evolved. But I think that had there been someone who I met in 1991 and went and spent the next 25 years in Australia or on Mars and came back, I think they'd say there'd been a revolution in higher education in terms of the vastly greater number of universities, doubled just after 1991, the number of people going to university, the influence that universities had in their societies, the fact that we now have a regime where the graduate repays the cost of their education. A lot of things, I think, have changed. But while I was there, it was just evolving. And indeed, I think that also leads back to Paul's comment that we're so used to evolving rather than facing real challenge. But of course, if you're in IT, I think there's been a number of very clear revolutionary changes. I'll allude to one in a moment, but just the fact that we moved from around that period to personal computers as being the mechanism, we have brought IT to bear on our back office operations, and that was a prime focus of mine and Simon Marsden, who's in the room, possibly others, going back all that period. We've moved to learning environments. Loads of things have happened, and each one of them has required, in my view, a very significant change in the way you manage the information infrastructure in your institution. They've changed the way we thought about what we were trying to do with students, I think. So, in summary, I think that there has been revolution in the IT world. It's more difficult to pick out what were truly revolutions in education as a whole. I do want actually to mention something that happened 25 years ago next week, and that happened in the upstairs bar of the Johnson Hall Refectory in the University of Aberdeen. And that was when Bob Day, then I think at Rutherford Appleton, before joining JNT, outlined Project Shoestring, which was because a shoestring was what it was done on, and involved the conversion of Janet from an X25 network to the IP network we know today, and the establishment of the first Super Janet in that framework, and the change from Little Endian to Big Endian, or was it Big Endian to Little Endian? I can never quite remember. Does anybody remember those days? Shirley was there. Great stuff. And this was a complete revolution, because not just in technical terms, which it was, but because we were thinking in an insular way in the UK about coloured book standards and the like, and we had to think in world terms. It was a revolution, and actually it was down, in my view, to Bob Day, who has delivered several different versions of Super Janet throughout the time, and is I think, a reliable and consistent source of expertise and advice. If there was one person in higher education I would give a knighthood to, it would be Sir Bob Day. So that's your aspiration, to make a contribution like that. I think, though, let's take that definition that I was dropping in as what I mean by revolution. How do we have to change our mindset about the future? How do we have to think what we're doing now won't do? How do we do the Paul Boag thing of changing the way we think about education? Remembering that, I guess, our core business of transforming the lives of people by intellectual challenge and by equipping with skills of various kinds, and developing new understandings and knowledge that will change our society. They're likely to remain our core activity. One thing has shocked me this year. A series of headlines in the paper. The left-hand one there talks about just the numerical impact of universities. Students coming off the voting register, or not going on the voting register, potentially making a difference, I guess, in the Brexit roll, because that was, I think, in January. Then the Scottish thing, actually, that the Scottish Government feels so strongly about university governance, they've passed a bill which I think didn't command overwhelming support from all universities, principally around things like electing university chairs. Now, the government's the government, they can pass legislation about anything they want to pass legislation about, but we have treasured our autonomy, and perhaps a bit of a shock to our thinking that the government should pass such a bill in Scotland, and of course we're facing a bill, not necessarily a similar bill actually, but a bill in England as well. Front page stories, which is actually my theme of the moment. 2 more front stage stories, all of these from the last 2 and a bit months. The issue that universities are at the heart of the battle against anti-extremism has become a persistent front page story, and in England is a predominant topic. It matters to my organisation because we are the Prevent monitors, and we are engaging with universities on a weekly basis where they deal with the challenge of implementing the legislation that means, and I now speak not necessarily rigorously, but it means that when you have platforms, you've got to assess who's on those platforms, try and provide balance and chairmanship, and do risk assessments and all that. Something that is particularly difficult, for example, because student unions are not under the control of this legislation so directly. We don't regulate student unions, but universities are, and the relationship between student unions and their universities can be tricky. Front page story. The front page story, roads must fall, is but one aspect of the freedom of speech, the no platforming thing that ties in, indeed, with the Prevent agenda. Consistently, front page stories at universities on the front page. Students in crisis over poor maths and English on the front page again. And of course the universities talking about the Brexit thing. Now, I have never known in 25 years universities be on the front page so much. There was a brief period around the move to £9,000 fees, and of course the action that some protesters took where we were on the front page. What's remarkable, and I've not mentioned them all here, I'll mention a few more in a minute. What's been remarkable this year has been the sustained appearance of universities on the front page over a range of issues, and overwhelmingly critical. I thought we'd got to a place where mostly our media coverage, other than over fees, was positive about the great breakthroughs we made. And I realise you can't see that. I'm really sorry. I'll try blowing it up next time. This is the Prime Minister saying there's more black kids in prison than in universities, and I haven't managed to get the front page story there. Now, that was the Prime Minister off a weekend making a major media intervention. It wasn't done at the drop of a hat. The very next day there was a summit in Whitehall which the Prime Minister attended, and involving key players from across the sector, talking about how seriously he viewed the fact that universities weren't taking their responsibilities to society significantly enough, and talked about all sorts of measures that could be done. Now, I find it absolutely remarkable that a Prime Minister should consider a university matter something so important to have a major initiative about. And we've also seen stuff about diversity in our workforce in the press, although I'm not sure on the front pages. The coverage has been overwhelmingly critical. And these next two stories, which again you can only see the headlines, this is last Sunday's Sunday Times, academics in revolt at Manchester, here even, as China reaps the benefits of British breakthroughs. Now if you read that story, it's basically about the university doing a deal with a Chinese company, I believe actually a Taiwanese company, where in return for investment they get access to certain kinds of intellectual property. It's a deal that's normally done by universities all over the place, and as Manchester say, it has tight contractual terms around it. This is in me raising it, not to make any particular comment about that deal. But the underpinning stuff was, why are universities giving their intellectual property away, and not necessarily for free, but giving it away to foreign countries? Unfortunately, 3 weeks before, I think, university spinouts demand a better deal. This was an attack on universities for holding on to intellectual property and not releasing it freely. Now, there are nuances to both stories. It's not quite as simple as that. But nevertheless, 3 weeks apart, universities are criticised for sharing and for holding on to things. One might be tempted to think that this year there's been a consistent series of criticisms about the institutions that are our universities. And I would draw the comparison with the BBC, which used to be an organisation which was largely above criticism, and which, for a number of reasons, which I don't pass judgment on, has become the receipt of much critical comment, and in my view, leading to an undermining of their brand. I believe universities are so important to society that we can't afford to go the BBC route. I think we need to speak up very positively about our benefits, our strengths, and we need to take seriously, indeed very seriously, perhaps think of the BBC, we need to think very seriously of the criticisms that are being made and answering them, possibly, in some cases, responding. Now, these things come from a whole raft of political, social and economic challenges that the country faced and that's being passed on to university. In our grant letter, which is one of the ways the government announces what it considers are important things in the relations with university, there's yet another mention of the need to drive efficiencies. In past days, that has been often looked at the wage bill, sometimes particularly at the Vice-Chancellor's remuneration. I think this is a much more rounded challenge of whether universities, which have been at the receipt of an increasing amount of public funding throughout a recession where every other publicly funded organisation has received less, are they really taking their responsibility to use taxpayer money efficiently, seriously enough? Now, I think there's a good answer to that, and indeed the UUK have been on the case, but it's a pressure. Very clearly in England, we are devolving. This indeed is the centre of devolved attention, the most developed devolution deal. And this is a major strength for universities, because we have universities in every place. Universities are committed to their place, even those institutions like the University of Manchester, which seek to be national and global institutions, have a tremendous commitment to their place. But balancing the demands of place and of your local communities and society with the desire to go national and international is a particular challenge. I've mentioned in Scotland the government's view that universities are public bodies and should be regulated. Well, of course, in England, legally universities are, and indeed in Scotland, legally universities are private bodies, but in receipt of public funds, which gives the government a locus to challenge universities. And of course, governments can pass legislation about anything anyway. So the way we manage autonomy, shall I just say, might have to change in response to those pressures. It may be that we can sustain the argument that our responsibility, we're taking our responsibility so seriously that as private institutions we should continue to be autonomous. Perhaps that case will need to be made in other ways, in more subtle ways perhaps. STEM and skills, I'm not saying much about further education actually, but the skills agenda is very live, and so is the STEM agenda. They are continuing pressures on universities. Social mobility, effectively, I've referred to, I think, in those headlines. I'm not talking now about impact and research excellence, because I've talked about it for years everywhere, but the need for our research to make a difference remains, and proved in demonstrating that it does, a significant factor in a very positive spending review outcome for universities. Equalities and diversity I've mentioned. Leverage, the need to get private funding, so it's not just all about public funding. Universities, of course, it isn't all about public funding. Universities have been very successful in that, but they urge to go further, not just in overseas students, not just in business income, but in every way that you can. That challenge remains, and of course I've alluded to the free speech thing. God, there's another slide of this stuff. The point of this slide, without dwelling on the topics, is to say it's fast moving. We were talking in the autumn all about productivity. We used to talk about growth. In the autumn we talked about productivity, and in the spring and summer we're going to be talking about innovation with a national innovation plan to come. I forgot to mention in the headlines, right at the start, I think the end of December, there was some stuff about what at one time might have been referred to as students horsing around, but has now taken on a rather darker tone of harassment. And I think a very fair criticism that might be made of us by society of whether we in today's world need to handle student relations differently. The staff thing and the student success thing are fast moving as well as being activities. And just here a plug, if you want to get informed comment about this stuff, the Wong Kei-chi blog is absolutely fantastic. There's a piece by the Equality Challenge Unit that presents a much more balanced view of equalities and diversity than that you would get in the mainstream press. So I commend it to you. The devolution deals change, well, quite literally by the week. There was more in the budget. The apprenticeship levy and the need to provide apprenticeships and indeed degree apprenticeships is live. The immigration levy, which is proposed but not implemented, that we might have to pay £1,000 for each person from outside the EU that works for us. The charities, changes is probably the wrong word, but the talk about not allowing those in receipt of public funding to lobby is a challenge. That's a heck of a lot of pressures that universities are under, challenges. And why? Well, it's quite simply, I think, because we matter more. We get more public money than we did. The numbers going to university have phenomenally increased. Universities are the only institution in many parts of the country that actually have scope for investment. As indeed one of my colleagues said to me, we haven't seen any cranes in our town for years. All of a sudden, there's a load of cranes that are on the site of the local university. And I think we cannot doubt the fact that, whereas when I started in 1991, admittedly in a very small university, in societal terms, universities mattered mostly to those who went. Now, we matter as institutions. So, against that background, what's the revolutions that might happen? Teaching quality and the need to place the same esteem on high-quality teaching as high-quality research is the thing that's actually caught lots of the headlines and brought up really was the key point in the Green Paper. Something that's a challenge because it's been developed for England, but a possibility that the other nations might see value in joining. A very difficult thing to do because we don't have the same balanced view or the same consensus view about what good quality teaching is as we do about good quality research. And quite challenging because we're also looking at the baseline quality assurance that we do at the moment. It's potentially an enormous change. If over the years it comes to be as influential in universities as research assessment and the REF has, it will be a revolution, perhaps over a period. We're still being, I've talked twice now about social mobility. That is in the Green Paper. It's one of the reasons for doing the TEF, which I think is quite complicated. How many, what are the multiple reasons for which we want to look at teaching excellence? Then the Green Paper talks about, oh yes, and the level playing field for new and existing providers. Absolutely important, already underway, but the government determined to open up the market to more competition. And I'm conflicted in that because my son works for an alternate provider, and I quite see the benefits his institution bring that would be difficult for traditional institutions to bring. He's very much a niche provider. So again, if we see a significant number of additional providers, and there's already several hundred more alternate providers than universities, but many of them very, very small indeed, that will be potentially revolution. Difficult to say over what time period. And then things like reforming the HE architecture is really about the bureaucracy, people like me, and I'm not going to dwell on that here because I guess you don't much care whether we're called one thing or another or work in Bristol or Swindon. The functions will be much the same. So we're expecting a bill in this Queen's speech in May, and it's been trailed as opening up the market, though to an extent that's happened but without the legislative framework. The Green Paper didn't cover lots of things that are important. I've mentioned prevent. Postgraduate loans weren't in the Green Paper, but we've had them in the spending review, and I put question mark in the budget because I thought it would be in, but I wrote these slides before. Well, they were in postdoctoral loans and doctoral loans and postgraduate loans in more detail within the budget. Part-time provision is so important. The part-time numbers have just plummeted. That too, there's about to be a review announced in the budget. I didn't put that there, and there was some relaxation of loan terms in the spending review. Research wasn't there, but we're looking, I think, with continued increased investment, or shall we say flat in real terms, to continue the success of UK universities and research. Knowledge exchange didn't get mentioned in the Green Paper, but it's in the National Innovation Plan. And data. We're fixated on big data and the potential it has, revolutionary potential in a number of other sectors. I suspect this is one of the things Paul was getting at, had I been here for his talk. Universities collect a lot of data, mostly through UCISA, but also through UCAS and others. The data architecture has been much the same for the 25 years, actually, I think I've been in higher education. If big data provides revolutionary benefits, I think the framework from 25 years ago won't work. Andy Yule is here. Where are you, Andy? Thank you. Who's been in charge of the HEDIT program that's looking at how do we restructure our data to make it fit for much broader purposes. And HESA have been trying to, well, they have a project plan to put in place a way of collecting that data that makes it less onerous than currently. A lot of work to do with HESA and with Andy to take forward those two issues, but they are absolutely critically important. And they're one of the things on this list that are a direct challenge to you, because it's going to be hard work to change the way in which we collect data. I used to worry a lot about our HESA data collections when I worked in a university, and I think it's very important you get them right. At the moment, I'm in the middle of auditing some HESA data collected for knowledge exchange. It's important you get it right, it's important you cut the burden, and it's important that you want to do it because you see the benefits. And I think that a number of IT developments in universities over my 25 years have proved problematic because people were not bought into them. Sometimes IT directors weren't bought into them, sometimes academics, sometimes others. I think this is a critically important phase in which the IT community have got an immense role to play, as do the planners and registrars and the like, and the challenge to work together. So take that man Yule, stand up Andy, take him out for a drink. The only way we'll get it, you can sit down now Andy, the only way we'll get this data stuff right is by engaging with key people. And just as we needed the wisdom of Bob Day to pilot us through the early and indeed later days of Superjanet, we need the wisdom of people like Andy. It's a direct challenge to you to engage in how we can better collect and utilize university data. I'm not going to dwell on the nurse report unless anyone wants to ask questions about it, because it really is about restructuring the research councils, possibly Innovate UK and us, and it won't, I think, make the most enormous difference. It's not revolutionary, I think, for people in universities bidding for grants or submitting top quality papers. I've talked about PG loans. These are little things that make a difference. There's been enormous resentment in the sector for some years because once you'd done one degree, that was your public funding gone. If you wanted to retrain, particularly to do a STEM degree, you couldn't. Now you can get public funding. I think that's great news. And I think I don't need to. Oh, the last one. That's again a significant change. We're asking nurses, midwives, podiatrists, radiotherapists and the like, who currently get bursaries from the NHS, Health Education England, to study. We're asking them to come to university and to repay through the loan system in the same way as undergraduates do. Now, that sounds a bit tough, but except we just need more nurses. And this allows us to create 10,000 extra places. In fact, we're uncapping numbers in the same way for undergraduates, so there could be more. It's a significant challenge. Will people do it? But a very, very significant benefit for the health service if we can carry it off. University is absolutely at the heart of that. And we've been through some difficult times on teacher training where different models have been used. This is a chance to work with our sponsor department, BIS, and with the Department of Health to deliver what the nation needs for future healthcare. Potentially, I think, a bit revolutionary. If we could dramatically increase the number of nurses, that would be revolutionary. I've mentioned the apprenticeship levy and so on. And just a word about drivers for devolution. It's actually, I think, not just about providing the people and the infrastructure, factors of production. It's about thinking about how you get smart, sustainable growth. It's the science and innovation audits that are underway at the moment, trying to work out what are the strengths in different areas. How do you capitalize on the strengths? We're trying to deal with long-run underperformance, poor productivity. How is it that our productivity, is it 15% less than the French and the Italians? I find that quite difficult. And I think understanding it, and I think our economists have got a lot to do to help us understand it, is important. The fact that the disparities widening, it says there, across many local areas, yet we don't want a country with immense geographical inequality. We want to do what we can, and yesterday's budget announcements really talked substantially about that. If we're going to work together, clusters, agglomeration, clusters of both business and indeed knowledge bodies, what's the best understanding of making that work, given that working together always comes with costs as well as benefits? How do we ensure we get the benefits and minimize the costs? Well, as it says at the bottom, universities increasingly emerging as the most important anchor institutions, the only institutions with money for investment. The institutions that are not part of local government, not part of business, can play a catalytic role. I think just picking that bottom point, moving from universities engaging with their stakeholders, which is the way I think we often think of it, it's the way I thought of it when I was at university, to partnerships, both within and across sectors. One of the things I would most like to see, which occasionally happens now, is business not coming to say, we want universities to do this for us, but coming to say, we want to do things with universities and they do things with us, being treated as equal partners, because the university sector in the UK is phenomenally successful, more successful than almost all our business sectors in terms of external income, overseas income, technically exporting our product. and in terms of our worldwide performance by any comparative measure you choose to use. Now, being hubristic about our success doesn't get you anywhere, but equally speaking with confidence about what we've got to offer can get you somewhere. And we've got to take the whole devolution seriously. I've already mentioned the need to balance local and international responsibilities. We've got strategic economic plans. We've got universities playing their part in public services, often running public services for which there's no publicly funded alternative vehicle ready. And indeed, there's new sources of funding to do it, which universities have to take very seriously. Substantial amounts of money available. Those cranes, many of them come from investments from the European Investment Bank on very good terms for universities. Universities are into bonds, they're into many venture capital funds, and the new combined authorities with mayors have investment funds. So let's not pretend this is an altruistic exercise that universities are in. Universities have got skills and they can build capacity if there's investment there to build the capacity, and they can deliver benefits. We've got to talk about that. Is that a revolution? Are we moving from, well, yeah, we'll do some stuff, but it's the students and the research that really matter, to, yes, we're going to look to do new things that will also bring benefits for our students and benefits for our research. Again, looking holistically about what we do. So, I think that's an awful litany of challenges we face. I think it's a far greater set of challenges we've had at any point in the last 25 years. We are being challenged on every front. That has never happened before. We've been challenged on one or two fronts at a time. How do we respond? Well, actually, how do you respond? And the first thing to say, we've got this enormous benefit in having JISC. No other country has got an organisation as well developed as JISC, and which has done so much. Paul has just talked to you. I think JISC faces significant challenge. It's got to justify subscriptions from universities in a way it's not had to before. You shouldn't be giving it money unless it's delivering benefit for you. Nevertheless, all of the challenges I've just outlined, well, many of the challenges I've just outlined, require us to work together. And trying to each develop the wheel is a very, very inefficient, to go back to one of my early words, way of doing things. JISC is there to serve us in working collectively, and they should be bullied into doing that, to present it from the university's point of view, and it's Paul and his colleagues' job to ensure that the offer they have will deliver according to the challenges that universities face, but particularly the ones that the subscribers face. I have confidence they'll do that, and you heard Paul earlier. We are continuing to put substantial amounts of money from the national budget, and the much smaller national budget, because most of the money moves now through the student fee, into JISC, because we believe it brings inestimable benefit to UKHE. But we'll only continue to believe that if you tell us it's true. Janet, in my view, is an absolutely core resource, again, of inestimable value. Just to make a very specific point again, I get rather nervous occasionally when I hear people talking about, well, I could buy the consumer service from somewhere else. Now, I'm out of touch with all this, although at one time I was indeed, I was the person defending the sector against subscriptions in 2002 or 3, and now I'm the person that effectively, because we're the major funder of Janet, it rather does insist that we have a mix of subscriptions and national funding. I think, from my days then, that the complexities there are around peering and specialist use particularly cannot easily be met by universities opting out, and I think a few opting out poses a very great cost on those who remain. For that reason, until now, we've made the subscriptions mandatory, but we said that would be for a period, and for a period it will be. It annoys me when I hear people make flip statements, and it sounds to me like they haven't engaged the argument. So I'd urge JISC to make the argument more clearly for a single coherent network that is ubiquitous, It's their responsibility to make the case. I'd encourage every university IT director, and I realise you're under immense budgetary pressures in connection with this, partly because of the way local budgeting works in universities, every IT director to engage with the issues before they pontificate. Because I know only too well from engaging, as I do most of the time with vice-chancellors, how they pick things up that haven't really perhaps been fully explained to them. And I would strongly encourage IT directors to be fully in the know before they brief their great leaders. So as I said, absolute challenge to you. If we get this wrong, we will mess up something valuable. And it was messed up in the States and had to be recreated about 10 years ago. So please, please, don't just pontificate. Get the knowledge and then take the decision is yours. One of the great things, although it annoyed me actually, was to people come in from outside and say, well, IT is here to serve the business. And being a bit of a recalcitrant at times, I didn't like to refer to universities as the business. To me, it's about students, it's about knowledge. But that's just a language thing. Of course it is a business. We all want paid at the end of the month. We want a sustainable business model. So it is right, and it's absolutely right, that IT is there to serve what the university wants. And I think those who've come in from outside and challenged us, and I guess again that leads back to what Paul was saying earlier, are doing that. So to do that, you need to understand the business, don't you? And that's one of the reasons why I talked about all those challenges, because I suspect that some of them are not ones you face in your day-by-day activity. It just worries me slightly that whereas for a number of years there was an IT answer to most of the challenges that universities had, virtual learning environments or learning platforms or whatever, and indeed possibly now research data systems, there might be a more collective answer than us doing it individually, although there's also good things available from the private sector. Many of those issues, there was just an IT answer. Now I think, what's the IT answer to devolution and the challenges you face over local engagement? It's not so obvious to me. Perhaps that's because I'm detached from things now and just don't have the vision. But I would challenge you to look at these things that I've mentioned and think, how do you serve the business? In some cases, you've just got to provide the back office facilities, and that in itself is an immense challenge. If we have a TEF putting the IT, well, when we have a TEF, sorry, we putting the infrastructure in place for that will be a back office job that I think will be quite a big one. But what about the things that aren't back office jobs? How can you provide things directly for the students, the researchers, but also the partners that you're working with, that deliver benefit to them within a suitably legal framework? And I think that's tricky. So I think we've got to look at the core business and at how we also do specific things. And I think that responsibility is you. I started off saying evolution or revolution. Well, it'll be more of an evolution if you grab hold of the possibilities and introduce them in a planned way. Revolutions tend to end up in deaths, and I'm not too keen on that sort of thing. So I think a challenge is to you individually to think what you can do, and I've mentioned a couple of things very specifically, but much more broadly that, what can you do to equip your institution to cope with those challenges? But then just you as a person. I don't know how many of you feel that working for a university is just a job. I've met loads of people over the years. An awful lot of them are quite passionate about universities, and I'm afraid I am. I've worked either in research or higher education literally every day of my working life, and I've done it because I think we need research, we need to understand things, we need to change the world. And to do that, we need to equip people with intellectual, critical thinking, and with the skills they need to do their job. I think that there's loads of people who are not getting the opportunity to do that, and we should work towards fixing that. If you do feel passionately about it, what are you doing as an individual? Are you talking about this, both inside and with your staff, and outside, about what universities have got to offer, and how they can make our society, let's just be flippant, say a better place. You can characterize it in many ways. Are you talking up the benefit, for example, that those with museums and art galleries bring to your community? Are you talking it up? Do you go and visit them? Do you know what goes on? Are you talking up your local businesses who you see coming through? Do you read the stuff that's on your university websites? Great, great stories I see about how we've managed to help people. Are you just acting as an ambassador for your institution? And are you exciting your staff about it? And I think the future, the way of handling those challenges, the way of both bringing in evolutionary change and managing revolution is through the people at the top having the vision. I can tell you what I think the challenges are. You should know far better which ones are important to your university than I do. You should be able to engage with people like Paul who ask whether universities have got it. You are not just running an IT service. You are the leaders in your institution with distinctive capability and skills. And it won't work if you don't play that part, if you don't understand the broader context and you don't take your staff with you. So my challenge is make that response. Work out when you think revolution's coming and prepare for it. Let's go these days for an agile and lean project plan for evolution. It's a tremendous challenge. Our society depends on its universities. That much is clear from the front pages. We must respond to those front pages in more positive ways than, for example, the BBC. And that's not up to vice-chancellors just. It's up to everyone. The challenge is yours. Society's future is collectively yours. Go for it. Thanks.